Well, folks, it's that time of year again where we are here to recap the Panther season. And to recap the full season, we really have to go back to the very beginning. So we'll do that today, and then I'll give you my thoughts on everything that happened along the way. And it is quite a bit of content to go through. I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible, whether that's 15 minutes, 20 minutes, or 10 or 30. We will see. But my, oh my, what a start. First of all, Dave Canales getting hired as the head coach of the Carolina Panthers. It came out of left field for most folks. Felt like he was one of the last potential head coaching candidates that came into the mix, and then he wins the job. And a lot of people were skeptical, I included. A lot of people thought, hey, this is going to be another yes man. This is someone that Tepper and company can manipulate. But a decision was made. And so here we are with a fresh start in Carolina. Not to mention Dan Morgan is the GM. Speaking of Dan Morgan, have a 3-part series on him. If you have not had a chance to go out and watch that, please do. We evaluate his trades, his free agent signings, and everything else that went along with this year. So lots of content to dive into there, but we're here to talk about the overall season for the Carolina Panthers. And so, of course, we have a new head coach coming in, not to mention just a new head coach. Like, this is his first time in the NFL as a head coach. It had been a while. You go back and look at his history, and I think I saw someone on Tampa Bay, because I like to look at Tampa Bay's articles of Dave Canales. Last year or 2 years ago when he was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, that was his first time calling plays since the high school team that he coached in California. That's how long it had been. This guy had been on a journey. He had been overlooked multiple times for the offensive coordinator role in Seattle, and I think a lot of people miss that. Sure, they like to pair him with this idea that, yeah, Dave Canales, the quarterback whisperer, he did this, this, and this along the way, but he did get overlooked. And I mean, he spent quite a bit of time there in Seattle, but he was patient. He waited his time. He goes to Tampa Bay, puts together a heck of a season, and then becomes the head coach of a division rival in the Carolina Panthers. So you have this new head coach at the helm, looking back and where he started and where he is, he's grown quite a bit. I mean, I listened to every single press conference. You could even hear him during the season leading up to it, the small details of being a brand new head coach, whether it was the first practice where he talked about blowing the whistle for the first time and being able to control that, to going through the season and having to face a lot of adversity or decisions that he didn't have to. A lot of things, everything coming across his desk compared to when he's a position coach or an offensive coordinator, everything you see. And there were quite a few storylines for the Carolina Panthers through this season. We know the biggest one being Bryce Young, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit. Let's do a larger recap as far as the wins and losses, and then we'll talk about the storylines that happened along the way. So the Carolina Panthers finished at 5-12. There for a long time, it looked like the Panthers may win 2 or 3 games, and maybe 2 if we're being honest. Starting out at 0-2, again, that's when Bryce Young gets benched shortly after that, which again we'll dive into in just a minute. Andy Dalton comes in, against the Las Vegas Raiders. They get their first win. It looks like a whole new team. Then things kind of sputter out of control. Andy Dalton has the car wreck, and then we see a renewed Bryce Young. It took a little bit to get there. They rattle off, 2, 3, 5 losses in a row, sitting at 1-7. Shots making the playoffs certainly weren't there. But then we get into the back half of the schedule. And again, there wasn't a lot to play for, but there was a lot of good teams. And I remember folks talking about this backstretch after the bye being one of the most difficult schedules for the Panthers. You look at New Orleans, the New York Giants, and then you come out of that and you have Kansas City, Tampa Bay, Philadelphia, Dallas, who we thought would be better, which of course they beat the Panthers, Arizona, Tampa, and Atlanta. It was a very strong finish for the Carolina Panthers. Now, there were some moments in here that stunk, but when you look at probably the last 8 or 9 games, it was very competitive football, which was not the case during the stretch where Andy Dalton was at the helm. Now, a lot of things happened this year. Injuries on the defensive side of the ball. People have a lot of mixed emotions and feelings about the thought that Ejiro Evero is coming back in Carolina to be the defensive coordinator. Yeah, I'm there with you. I have those same hesitations and questions, but it is what it is. And so we can only hope looking into next year that maybe with a healthy team and a reinforcements through the draft as well as free agency, that we can see this team be a mediocre defense, like average, middle of the road, and that by default should put the Carolina Panthers in chance to win quite a few games, 8, 9, chance to compete. I'm not talking playoffs yet, but chance to compete for a playoff spot as we look for their incremental improvement. And that's one of the big things that we want to see heading into next year. But you look at the back half. So they knock off, again, this once Bryce returns, Denver. That was just a tough game. Denver had really good defense. Folks got upset with Sean Payton. I think that's just people hate Sean Payton, and I was one of them, trying to quote unquote run up the score. They finally get a win, get in the win column against New Orleans. Then they go to Germany, beat the Giants, and they're coming back home, and people are not giving them any chance at all against the Kansas City Chiefs. They put up a heck of a game, go toe to toe, lose 30-27, have a heartbreaking loss to Tampa Bay, have another heartbreaking loss to the Philadelphia Eagles, who are now sitting in the conference championship in the NFC and look like they have a good chance to win it. We'll see. Jaden Daniels may have, and Quinn and company, Frankie Lou, Jeremy Chin may have something else to say about that. It felt like Bryce was trending in the right direction. He has some setbacks against Dallas. Through all this, of course, every week it was, is Bryce Young going to be the starter? Is Bryce Young going to be the starter? And it was kind of back and forth, non-committal energy from Dave Canales. Bounce back win against an Arizona team trying to sneak into the playoffs. They pull off the upset 36-30, get dismantled against Tampa Bay. I mean, you were playing with third and fourth string guys on the defense side of the ball, not a lot to play for. But you go against Atlanta, who, although they didn't control their destiny, needed to win to have a chance to get in the playoffs. You knock them off on the road, beating your division rival to close the season 44-38. And it was the best game of Bryce Young's career, best game of the season for Bryce Young. And the Panthers finish at 5-12. And if you go back and watch, I did a season preview prediction of the NFC South. I've talked about this a few times. I was 2 total games away from a perfect record. So I had the order correct. I had Tampa Bay, then I had Atlanta, then I had Carolina and New Orleans. So I think I gave Carolina 6 wins and I gave Tampa 8. So they, of course, finished 9-8. We finished 5-12. So those were the 2 misses. Perfect record for New Orleans. Perfect record for Tampa Bay. So that was fun, man. Just want to call that out for folks if you care, which you probably don't. But finish, man. Going down the stretch, getting to 5 wins, start of the season, I talked about it, like 5-6 was the realistic goal. No fan ever wants to go into the season thinking like, yep, that's our benchmark. If we can get to 5 or 6 wins, the ceiling, and not be in the playoffs, like that's what I'm signing up for. Nobody likes wasted seasons. Players don't like wasted seasons. So it's a lot to manage. It certainly is. But I think the biggest story that we had going into this year was year 2 for Bryce Young. And could Dave Canales fix him? Although we learned very early, Dave Canales wasn't here to fix Bryce Young. He was here to lead a football team. And the very early benching of Bryce Young really set this thing off. And I said, when this moment happened, one, let's acknowledge it needed to happen. There's no denying that Bryce Young needed to sit out. No matter what side of the fence we're on, I should say, he needed to sit. No doubt about it. So let's not pretend that he was playing fantastic. The benching was deserved. The way it happened, though, of course, he comes off the field. Dave Canales says that Bryce Young's our quarterback. The next day he turns around and we have Andy Dalton listed as the starter. From there, it was just a game, man. And it's a mental game for fans. It's a mental game for everyone. Everyone writing Bryce Young off, people criticizing Dave Canales. And man, this thing worked out. Now, I'll tell you, it worked out, which we know. But let's also not pretend that Dave Canales had this plan, that he had a grand scheme to bring Bryce Young back into the fold. Like maybe there was, but it seemed like week after week when Andy Dalton was the starter, especially after they won in Las Vegas, that there was no doubt that Andy Dalton was going to be the starter moving forward. And he Even towards the end of the season, Dave Canales talked very highly of Andy and how he appreciated him. Bryce Young was kicked to the curb, man. And at least from a media standpoint, I mean, he goes from coming up to his weekly meeting with the media to sitting in his locker to getting questions like every other player to running the scout team to getting questions about running the scout team. I mean, it was a circus. It was, but it was a contained circus that Dave Canales was able to weather. So you have a very solid performance against the Las Vegas Raiders. Turns out the Raiders are just a terrible football team, but Andy Dalton looks amazing, throws for 300. He was the first one up until that point to have a 300-yard game, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, Dave Canales is good. Andy Dalton's good. Bryce Young's terrible. And so we have to sit and wait. We see Cincinnati, a semi-competitive game. We see a bad game against Chicago. Pretty bad game against Atlanta. Not great, I should say. And a just dismantling with Marcus Mariota and the Washington Commanders. I mean, we saw Jaden Daniels for a series. And then Mariota tore us apart. You have, of course, Washington in the NFC Championship. And then the moment that really changed, I say it changed the career for Bryce Young. It changed it for Dave Canales. It changed it for Andy Dalton. Because we were talking about Andy Dalton being the starter heading into next year. We were at that point in time. He gets in the car wreck. He's okay, which is great. You don't want to see anyone at all get hurt. So he gets in the car wreck. Initially, we thought it was a non-throwing hand. It is a throwing hand. He's not going to be able to throw the ball. He's at least going to sit out a week. So it was an opportunity and I wonder if the Panthers were competitive, if Andy Dalton kind of pushes through. But it was almost like, okay, this is a time for us to reset. We're going to take our time, and we're going to give Bryce Young another look. So they give Bryce Young another look. He doesn't play great, doesn't play good by any means, but plays okay against the Denver Broncos. And so you're like, okay, well, maybe do we see him again? Sure enough, go against New Orleans. We get to see him again. And again, the questions are still coming up. Is Bryce Young going to be the starter? And yes, we see Bryce Young get his third win as an NFL quarterback because he was not the starter against the Raiders. Third win as a starter in the NFL, and man, did it feel good to knock off the New Orleans Saints. Really competitive football game, 23-22. So you're like, okay, well, we're traveling to Germany. Are we going to get Andy Dalton back in the mix now, knowing that playoffs are not out of reach, but still close? And we get to see Bryce Young go overseas to Germany, pull off a win, 20-17. Not a great game again, but it was like incremental improvements, building off of, each of those previous games. And everybody's like, okay, well, we're coming back home. There's no way we're going to knock off the Kansas City Chiefs. And man, did we see one of the most competitive football games that the Panthers have had. I mean, a team, again, in the AFC Championship, and no matter how many one-score games they've won or played, they have still battled and won the games, and that's what you got to do. You got to win those close games. That's why I think it was important for the Panthers down the stretch to win a lot of these games that were neck and neck. But if they win against Kansas City, you're talking about being 4-7. If they knock off Tampa, 5-7, beat Philadelphia 6-7, they were right there, or would have been right there in the hunt in the NFC South. Very close. Absolutely close and competitive football. I think that's all we could ask for, but they just couldn't get over the hump. They lose to Tampa. Chuba Hubbard fumbles. They let Baker Mayfield scramble. We move on to Philadelphia, travel to Philadelphia, which is very hard to play there anyways. Lose 16-22. Xavier Legette drops a would-be go-ahead touchdown, assuming they make the extra point. And that was it. So Panthers end up losing that game, and at that point, you're not officially eliminated, but close enough to being eliminated from the playoffs. You go against Dallas, and the Dallas game, was it 4 turnovers for Bryce Young? It was just not a good day for him. So, how are you going to respond? You're sitting with 3 wins. You've got 3 games to go. Can you get off another win or 2? Beat some teams that are playing for the playoffs. And sure enough, like we talked about, knock off Arizona, get demolished by Tampa, and then close the season, knocking off the Atlanta Falcons. So overall, first year for Dave Canales. I want to applaud him. I do. I think he's a really good head coach. I know some people probably wanted Harbaugh, Quinn, Vrabel, Belichick. I think we just got to give it a little more time for Dave Canales. I think the Panthers have their guy. Now, throughout this season, the one thing, as we talked about defense, that was just terrible was the run defense. And we're talking one of the top 5 worst rushing defenses in NFL history. Most points allowed in NFL history. It was a total letdown. If you go back and just look at this team, if we have a mediocre defense, average, this team is winning probably 8-9 games. So they're that close. Sitting at 5, Bryce Young having to do a lot of the heavy lifting, Chuba Hubbard missing some time down the stretch, Jonathan Brooks getting injured, Xavier Legette with the drops, Jatavian Sanders getting injured, Jalen Coker on the rise. It was an up and down year. Tommy Tremble, the one constant for the Carolina Panthers was the play of the offensive line. You invested all that money in the offensive line, and it finally paid dividends. And so now, heading into next year, all that we can hope is that the Carolina Panthers figure out how they replicate what they did on offense on the defensive side of the ball. And there's a lot of work to be had. But overall, I mean, if we're giving out grades, I say it's a B-. All things considered, when you go back and look at the start of the Tepper era here, there's been a lot of turnover, a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of doubts, and it felt like Tepper was out of the picture, which is an A+ for me. And you have Dave Canales running the show, making his decisions. I even think, as some people have highlighted, that bringing back Ejiro Evero was more of his decision. Now, I do think Ejiro Evero is on a short lease. No question about it. And so I don't know if you look at some of the vacant positions outside of linebacker, secondary, if Dave Canales tries to bring in a guy that he thinks could take over as the defensive coordinator in the event that Evero is let go. It's been a quiet off season. It's very much a what have you done for me lately league, because Ejiro was one of the hottest head coaching names the last 2 seasons. He's not even getting looks now. And I've tried to track every available or every interview that's come across. I have not seen him interviewing for any head coaching opportunity. So he's just sitting idly by. I'll say this. I think the consistency, and Dave Canales has talked about the scheme, playing it when it's coached up well, when you have the players. So it seems like an off season that's going to be devoted to it. And I think every position, J.C. Horn's safe. Brown is going to be safe. But I think every position is going to be open for an upgrade. And that's even at the linebacker with Trevin Wallace. I wouldn't be surprised if they bring in a linebacker alongside Josie Jewell. There's only a handful of guys that are truly top-notch. And I don't know if I say top-notch, but yeah, close to top-notch at their position. So a lot of work to do. Good thing is the offense is relatively stable. Still need to figure out who's going to be the number 1 wide receiver here in Carolina. That'll be a continued discussion that we have. Is Adam Thielen coming back? Is Xavier Legette going to improve year over year from his first year to his sophomore year? Can we expect an even bigger season from Jalen Coker, a full season? You go back and look at the stats. His production, I mean, he was right there with XL, played in 5 less games than him as well. So it's an exciting time to be a Panthers fan. A big draft ahead. Again, the Panthers only have their first round pick, pick 8. And then I think since the Rams lost, it's now pick 57. So they got a big gap between 8 and 57. Still would not be surprised unless Abdul Carter's right there or Mason Graham that the Panthers potentially trade back out of that number 8 spot to recoup a few more players, because they need some guys, man. They need probably two or three within the first 50 picks, in my opinion, to really see significant improvement. You got to hit on these draft picks. So, folks, I don't know. I think that's going to recap everything. There's a lot. Like, we could spend all day talking about the season. We're close to 20 minutes. I think that's a good enough summary from my podcast listeners and folks. And hey, if you've made it this far, I do appreciate you tuning into this show. If you are on YouTube, please subscribe. And of course, anywhere else you get your podcast, follow the show. Please give us 5 stars. I don't ask for a lot of things, but those things greatly benefit me in helping this continue to grow. So as always, this is Carolina Dad. Y'all have a good one.